This is part 38 of Good Omens. Clouds churned around the horizon. Overhead the sky was still clear, the air torn by nothing more than a light breeze. But it wasn't normal air. It had a crystallized look to it, so that you might feel that if you turned your head you might see new facets. It sparkled. If you had to find a word to describe it, the word thronged might slip insidiously into your mind. Thronged with insubstantial beings waiting only the right moment to become very substantial. Adam glanced up. In one sense, there was just clear air overhead. In another, stretching off to infinity, were the host of heaven and hell, wingtip to wingtip. If you looked really closely and had been specially trained, you could tell the difference. Silence held the bubble of the world in its grip. The door of the building swung open and the four stepped out. There was no more than a hint of human about three of them now. They seemed to be humanoid shapes, made up of all the things they were or represented. They made Death seem positively homely. His leather greatcoat and dark visored helmet had become a cowled robe, but these were merely details. A skeleton, even a walking one, is at least human. Death of a sort lurks inside every living creature. The thing is, said Adam urgently, they're not really real. They're just like nightmares, really. But we're not asleep, said Pepper. Dog whined and tried to hide behind Adam. That one looks as if he's melting, said Brian, pointing to an advancing figure, if such could still be called, of pollution. There you are, then, said Adam encouragingly. It can't be real, can it? It's common sense. Something like that can't be really real. The four halted a few meters away. It has been done, said Death. He leaned forward a little and stared eyelessly out at Adam. It was hard to tell if he was surprised. Yes, well, said Adam. The thing is, I don't want it done. I never asked for it to be done. Death looked at the other three and then back to Adam. Behind them, a jeep skewed to a halt. They ignored it. I do not understand, he said. Surely your very existence requires the ending of the world. It is written. I don't see why anyone has to go on writing things like that, said Adam calmly. The world is full of all sorts of brilliant stuff, and I haven't found out all about it yet, so I don't want anyone messing it about or ending it before I've had the chance to find out about it. So you can all just go away. That's the one, Mr. Shadwell, said Aziraphale, his words trained into uncertainty even as he uttered them. The one with the t-shirt. Death stared at Adam. You are part of us, said War between teeth like beautiful bullets. It is done. We make the world anew, said Pollution. His voice was insidious as something leaking out of a corded drum into a water table. You lead us, said Famine, and Adam hesitated. Voices inside him still cried out that this was true, and that the world was his as well, and all he had to do was turn and lead them out across a bewildered planet. They were his kind of people. In tiers above, the host of the sky waited for the word. You cannot want me to shoot him, but he's a burn. Said Aziraphale. Yes, perhaps we just better wait a bit. What do you think? Until he grows up? What do you mean? said Crowley. Dog began to growl. Adam looked at them. They were his kind of people, too. You just had to decide who your friends really were. He turned back to the four. Get them, said Adam quietly. The slouch and slur had gone from his voice. It had strange harmonies. No one human could disobey a voice like that. War laughed and looked expectantly at them. Little boys, she said, playing with your toys. Think of all the toys I can offer you. Think of all the games. I can make you fall in love with me, little boys with your little guns. She laughed again, but the machine gun stutter died away as Pepper leaped forward and raised a trembling arm. It wasn't much of a sword, but it was about the best she could do with 2 bits of wood and a piece of string. War stared at it. I see, she said. Mono a mono, eh? She drew her own blade and brought it up so that it made a noise like a finger being dragged around a wine glass. There was a flash as they connected. Death stared into Adam's eyes. There was a pathetic jingling noise. Don't touch it, snapped Adam without moving his head. The them stared at the sword rocking to a standstill on the concrete path. Little boys, muttered Pepper disgustedly. Sooner or later, everyone has to decide which gang they belong to. But But, said Brian, she sort of got sucked up the sword. The air between Adam and Death began to vibrate as in a heat wave. Wensleydale raised his head and looked famine in the sunken eye. He held up something that, with a bit of imagination, could be considered to be a pair of scales made of more string and twigs. Then he whirled it around his head. Famine struck out a protective arm. There was another flash, and then the jingle of a pair of silver scales bouncing on the ground. "Don't touch them," said Adam. Pollution had already started to run, or at least to flow quickly, but Brian snatched the circle of grass stalks from his own hand and flung it. It shouldn't have handled like one, but a force took it out of his hands, and it whirred like a discus. This time the explosion was a red flame inside a billow of black smoke, and it smelled of oil. With a rolling, tinny little sound, a black and silver crown bowled out of the smoke and then spun around with a noise like a settling penny. At least they needed no warning about touching it. It glistened in a way that metal should not. "Where'd they go?" said Wensleydale. "Where they belong," said Death, still holding Adam's gaze. "Where they have always been, back in the minds of man." He grinned at Adam. There was a tearing sound. Death's robe split and his wings unfolded. Angels' wings, but not of feathers. They were wings of night, wings that were shapes cut through the matter of creation into the darkness underneath, in which a few distant lights glimmered. Lights that may have been stars or may have been something entirely else. "But I," he said, "am not like them. I am Azrael, created to be creation's shadow. You cannot destroy me. That would destroy the world." The heat of their stare faded. Adam scratched his nose. "Oh, I don't know," he said. "There might be a way." He grinned back. "Anyway, it's going to stop now," he said. "All this stuff with the machines. You've got to do what I say just for now, and I say it's got to stop." Death shrugged. "It is stopping already," he said. "Without them," he indicated the pathetic remnants of the other 3 horse-persons, "it cannot proceed. Normal entropy triumphs." Death raised a bony hand in what might have been a salute. "They'll be back," he said. "They're never far away." The wings flapped just once like a thunderclap, and the angel of death vanished. "Right then," said Adam to the empty air. "All is right. It's not going to happen. All the stuff they started, it must stop now." Newt stared desperately at the equipment racks. "You think there'd be a manual or something," he said. "We could see if Agnes has anything to say," volunteered Anathema. "Oh yes," said Newt bitterly. "That makes sense, does it? Sabotaging 20th century electronics with the aid of a 17th century workshop manual. What did Agnes Nutter know of the transistor?" "Well, my grandfather interpreted prediction 3328 rather neatly in 1948 and made some very shrewd investments," said Anathema. "She didn't know what it was going to be called, of course, and she wasn't very sound about electricity in general, but—" "I was speaking rhetorically. You don't have to make it work anyway. You have to stop it working. You don't need knowledge for that. You need ignorance." Newt groaned. All right, he said wearily. "Let's try it. Give me your prediction." Anathema pulled out a card at random. "He is not that which he says he is," she read. "It's number 1002. Very simple. Any ideas?" "Well, look," said Newt wretchedly. "This isn't really the time to say it, but—" He swallowed. "I'm actually not very good with electronics. Not very good at all." "You said you were a computer engineer, I seem to remember." "That was an exaggeration. I mean, just about as much of an exaggeration as you can possibly get, in fact. Really, I suppose it was more what you might call an overstatement. I might go so far as to say that what it really was," Newt closed his eyes, "was a prevarication." "A lie, you mean?" said Anathema sweetly. "Oh, I wouldn't go that far," said Newt. "Although," he added, "I'm not actually a computer engineer at all. Quite the opposite." "What's the opposite?" "Oh, if you must know, every time I try and make anything electronic work, it stops." Anathema gave him a bright little smile and posed theatrically, like that moment in every conjurer's stage act when the lady in the sequin steps back to reveal the trick. "Tra-la," she said. "Repair it," she said. "What?" "Make it work better," she said. "I don't know," said Newt. "I'm not sure I can." He laid a hand on top of the nearest cabinet. There was a noise of something he hadn't realized he'd been hearing suddenly stopping and the descending whine of a distant generator. The lights on the panels flickered and most of them went out. All over the world, people who had been wrestling with switches found that they switched. Circuit breakers opened, computers stopped planning World War III and went back to idly scanning the stratosphere. In bunkers under Nova Zelma, men found that the fuses they were frantically trying to pull out came away in their hands at last, and in bunkers under Wyoming and Nebraska, men in fatigue stopped screaming and waving guns at one another, and would have had a beer if alcohol had been allowed in missile bases. It wasn't, but they had one anyway. The lights came on. Civilization stopped its slide into chaos and started writing letters to the newspapers about how people got overexcited about the least little thing these days. In Tadfield, the machines ceased radiating menace. Something that had been in them was gone, quite apart from the electricity. Gosh, said Newt. There you are, said Anathema. You fixed it? Good. You can trust Agnes. Take it from me. Now let's get out of here. He didn't want to do it, said Aziraphale. Haven't I always told you, Crowley, if you take the trouble to look deep down inside anyone, you'll find that at the bottom they're really quite. It's not over, said Crowley flatly. Adam turned and appeared to notice them for the first time. Crowley was not used to people identifying him so readily, but Adam stared at him as though Crowley's entire life was passed inside the back of his skull, and he, Adam, was reading it. For an instant he knew real terror. He'd always thought the sort he'd felt before was the genuine article, but that was mere abject fear beside this new sensation. Those below could make you cease to exist by, well, hurting you in unbearable amounts, but this boy could not only make you cease to exist merely by thinking about it, but probably could arrange matters so that you had never existed at all. Adam's gaze swept to Aziraphale. Excuse me, why are you two people? Said Adam. Well, said Aziraphale, it's not right being two people, said Adam. I reckon you'd better go back to being two separate people. There was no showy special effects. There was just Aziraphale sitting next to Madame Tracy. Ooh, that felt tingly, she said. She looked Aziraphale up and down. Oh, she said in a slightly disappointed voice. Somehow I thought you'd be younger. Shadowell glowered jealously at the angel and thumped the Thundergun's hammer in a pointed sort of way. Aziraphale looked down at his new body, which was, unfortunately, very much like his old body, although the overcoat was cleaner. Well, that's over, he said. No, said Crowley. No, it isn't, you see, not at all. Now, there were clouds overhead, curling like a pot of tanjuli on full boil. You see, said Crowley, his voice leaden with fatalistic gloom. It doesn't really work that simply. You think wars get started because some old duke gets shot, or someone cuts off someone's ear, or someone sighted their missiles in the wrong place? It's not like that. That's just reasons which haven't got anything to do with it. What really causes wars is two sides that can't stand the sight of one another, and the pressure builds up, and then anything will cause it. Anything at all. What's your name, boy? That's Adam Young, said Anathema as she strode up with Newt trailing after her. That's right, Adam Young, said Adam. Good effort, you saved the world. Have a half-holiday, said Crowley, but it won't really make any difference. I think you're right, said Aziraphale. I'm sure my people want Armageddon. It's very sad. Would anyone mind telling us what's going on? Said Anathema, sternly folding her arms. Aziraphale shrugged. It's a very long story, he began. Anathema stuck out her chin. Go on, then, she said. Well, in the beginning, the lightning flash struck the ground a few meters from Adam and stayed there, a sizzling column that broadened at the base as though the wind electricity was filling an invisible mold. The humans pressed back against the jeep. The lightning vanished, and a young man made out of golden fire stood there. Oh dear, said Aziraphale, it's him. Him who? Said Crowley. The voice of God, said the angel. The Metatron. The them stared. Then Pepper said, No, it isn't. The Metatron's made of plastic, and it's got laser cannon, and it can turn into a helicopter. That's the cosmic Megatron, said Wensleydale weakly. I had one, but the head fell off. I think this one is different. The beautiful blank gaze fell on Adam Young, and then turned sharply to look at the concrete beside it, which was boiling. A figure rose from the churning ground in the manner of the Demon King in a pantomime, but if this one was ever in pantomime, it was one where no one walked out alive, and they had to get a priest to burn the place down afterwards. It was not greatly different to the other figure, except that its flames were blood red. Said Crowley, trying to shrink into a seat. Hi, The red thing gave him the briefest of glances as though marking him for future consumption, and then stared at Adam. When it spoke, its voice was like a million flies taking off in a hurry. It buzzed a word that felt, to those humans who heard it, like a file dragged down the spine. It was talking to Adam, who said, "Huh? No, I said already. My name's Adam Young." He looked the figure up and down. "What's yours?" "Beelzebub," Crowley supplied. "He's the lord of—" "Thank you, Crawley." "Thank you, Crawlsy," said Beelzebub. "Later we must have a serious talk. I'm sure thou hast much to tell me." Said Crowley. "Well, you see, what happened was—" "Silence." Right, said Crowley hurriedly. "Now then, Adam Young," said the Metatron. "While we can of course appreciate your assistance at this point, we must add that Armageddon should take place now. There may be some temporary inconvenience, but that should hardly stand in the way of the ultimate good." "Ah," whispered Crowley to Aziraphale, "what he means is we have to destroy the world in order to save it. As to what it stands in the way of, that has yet to be decided," buzzed Beelzebub. "But it must be decided now, boy. That is thy destiny. It is written." Adam took a deep breath. The human watchers held theirs. Crowley and Aziraphale had forgotten to breathe some time ago. "I just don't see why everyone and everything has to be burned up and everything," Adam said. "Millions of fish and whales and trees and sheep and stuff. And not even for anything important, just to say who's got the best gang. It's like us and the Johnson Knights. But even if you win, you can't really beat the other side because you don't really want to. I mean, not for good. You'll just start all over again. You'll just keep on sending people like these two," he pointed to Crowley and Aziraphale, "to mess people around. It's hard enough being people as it is without other people coming and messing you around." Crowley turned to Aziraphale. "Johnson Knights?" he whispered. The angel shrugged. "Early breakaway sect, I think," he said. "Sort of Gnostic, like the Ophites." His forehead wrinkled. "Or were they the Sithites? No, I'm thinking of the Coloridians. Oh dear, I'm sorry. There were hundreds of them. It's so hard to keep track." "People being messed around," murmured Crowley. "It doesn't matter," snapped the Metatron. "The whole point of the creation of Earth and good and evil. I don't see why it's so terrific about creating people as people and then getting upset because they act like people," said Adam severely. "Anyway, if you stop telling people it's all sorted out after they're dead, they might try sorting it all out while they're alive. If I was in charge, I'd try making people live a lot longer, like old Methuselah. It'd be a lot more interesting, and they might start thinking about the sort of things they're doing to all the environment and ecology, because they'll still be around in 100 years' time." "Ah," said Beelzebub, and he actually began to smile. "You wish to rule the world. That's more like the father." "I thought about all that, and I don't want to," said Adam, half turning and nodding encouragingly at them. "I mean, there's some stuff could do with altering, but then I'd expect people to keep coming up to me and getting me to sort out everything the whole time and get rid of all the rubbish and make more trees for them, and where's the good in all that? It's like having to tidy up people's bedrooms for them." "You never even tidy up your bedroom," said Pepper behind him. "I never said anything about my bedroom," said Adam, referring to a room whose carpet had been lost to view for several years. "It's general bedrooms, I mean. I didn't mean my personal bedroom. It's an analogy. That's just what I'm saying." Beelzebub and the Metatron looked at one another. "Anyway," said Adam, "it's bad enough having to think of things for Pepper and Winsley and Brian to do all the time so they don't get bored. So I don't want any more world than I've got. Thank you all the same." The Metatron's face began to take on the look familiar to all those subjected to Adam's idiosyncratic line of reasoning. "You can't refuse to be who you are," it said eventually. "Listen, your birth and destiny are part of the great plan. Things have to happen like this. All the choices have been made." "Rebellion is a fine thing," said Beelzebub, "but some things are beyond rebellion. You must understand." I'm not rebelling against anything, said Adam in a reasonable tone of voice. I'm pointing out things. Seems to me you can't blame people for pointing out things. Seems to me it'd be a lot better not to start fighting and just see what people do. If you stop messing them about, they might start thinking properly, and they might stop messing the world around. I'm not saying they would, he added conscientiously, but they might. This makes no sense, said the Metatron. You can't counter to the great plan. You must think. It's in your genes. Think. Adam hesitated. The dark undercurrent was always ready to flow back. Its reedy whisper saying, yes, that was it. That was what it was about. You have to follow the plan because you were part of it. It had been a long day. He was tired. Saving the world took it out of an 11-year-old body. Crowley stuck his head in his hands. For a moment there, just a moment, I thought we had a chance, he said. You had them worried. Oh, well, it was nice, well. He was aware that Aziraphale had stood up. Excuse me, said the angel. The trio looked at him. This great plan, he said. This would be the ineffable plan, wouldn't it? There was a moment's silence. It's a great plan, said the Metatron flatly. You are well aware. There shall be a world lasting 6,000 years, and it will conclude with... Yes, that's the great plan, said Aziraphale. He spoke politely and respectfully, but with the air of one who was just asked an unwelcome question at a political meeting and won't go away until he gets an answer. I was just thinking if it's ineffable as well. I just want to be clear on this point. It doesn't matter, snapped the Metatron. It's the same thing, surely. Surely? Thought Crowley. They don't actually know. He started to grin like an idiot. So you're not 100% clear on this, said Aziraphale. It's not given us to understand the ineffable plan, said the Metatron, but of course the great plan. But the great plan can only be a tiny part of the overall ineffability, said Crowley. You can't be certain that what's happening right now isn't exactly right from an ineffable point of view. It is written Beelzebub. But it might be written differently somewhere else, said Crowley, where you can't read it. In bigger letters, said Aziraphale. Underlined, Crowley added. Twice, suggested Aziraphale. Perhaps this isn't just a test of the world, said Crowley. It might be a test of you people too, God does not play games with his loyal servants, said the Metatron, but in a worried tone of voice. Woo-wee, said Crowley. Where have you been? Everyone found their eyes turning towards Adam. He seemed to be thinking very carefully. Then he said, I don't see why it matters what is written. Not when it's about you people. It can always be crossed out. A breeze swept across the airfield. Overhead, the assembled host rippled like a mirage. There was the kind of silence there might have been on the day before creation. Adam stood smiling at the two of them, a small figure perfectly poised exactly between heaven and hell. Crowley grabbed Aziraphale's arm. You know what happened? He hissed excitedly. He was left alone. He grew up human. He's not evil incarnate or good incarnate. He's just a human incarnate. Then, I think, said the Metatron, that I shall need to seek further instructions. I also, said Beelzebub, his raging face turning to Crowley, and I shall report of your part in this. Thou hast better believe it. He glared at Adam. And I don't know what thy father will say. There was a thundering explosion. Shadwell, who had been fidgeting with horrified excitement for some minutes, had finally got enough control of his trembling fingers to pull the trigger. The pellets passed through the space where Beelzebub had been. Shadwell never knew how lucky he had been that he'd missed. The sky wavered and then became just sky. Around the horizon the clouds began to unravel.